This week on To the Contrary, the U.S. Senate vote to protect abortion rights fails as expected. Will anti-abortion politicians up for re-election pay at the polls in November? Then, highly paid, highly educated women protest corporate orders to return to the office full-time. What can low-income women do? Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, seeking a new strategy. Can Democratic Senate contenders make anti-abortion candidates pay at the polls for voting against abortion rights? Democrats tried this week to pass a federal law making abortion legal. One moderate Democrat opposed the measure, as did the two self-named pro-choice Republicans in the Senate, Maine's Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. This comes after a U.S. Supreme Court draft decision eliminating Roe versus Wade was leaked to the media. Protests are being staged across the country as family planning organizations implore people to get involved. Democrats hope this will inspire people to vote Democratic in the upcoming midterms, which typically cost seats to the party in power. The U.S.'s turn away from abortion rights is an anomaly across the Americas. In Latin America, abortion access is expanding. Joining me today are former U.S. Representative Donna Edwards of Maryland, Ann Stone, Republican political consultant, podcast host Danielle Moodie, and Tiana Lowe, Washington Times columnist. Donna, would federal legislation have even been effective because the Supreme Court has the supreme right to decide matters of the Constitution?
Yeah, but of course it would. I mean, it would lay a foundation across the nation for one standard for abortion rights. And I think it would make it then very difficult for states to undermine that on their own. And it would be the basis upon which the Supreme Court would hold that the Congress has made a legislative decision upholding women's rights to abortion. So I think it was incredibly important to take that vote, but to pass federal legislation.
And do you agree?
You know, I think the vote was symbolic. It was a political ploy to try to isolate certain senators that are in iffy races to allow Schumer to be able to retain his majority. So I'm actually kind of ticked off about it because I think they could have done more to work with Murkowski and Collins to come up with a bill
frankly... Wait a minute. You don't think that there were political ploys that Mitch McConnell pulled when he was majority leader that gave the Republicans 2 seats on the Supreme Court that should have been appointed by Democrats?
That's not the question. Both sides play politics.
I mean, my point is just to say that this was a political ploy. Duh, that's all that happens in Washington.
No, it isn't all, and that should not be the standard that we're holding people to. The point is they could have worked with Collins and Murkowski and come up with something that might actually have brought a few more Republicans over, and also may not have cost them Manchin's vote. So both sides play politics, but this was clearly just about politics. Don't try to cast it that it was to protect women, because it wasn't. It was to protect Schumer and his majority. That's all it was about.
I mean, my thoughts are this. One, I don't believe that Joe Manchin is actually a Democrat, and I think that he has been more of a threat to the Biden administration than any Republican combined. We already know where Republicans sit, and where their feelings have been on abortion for the last 50 years. So for Democrats right now to act shocked, as if one, they did not put together any type of local or state strategy around codifying abortion, then two, to continue to believe that we're going to negotiate with people that have moved so far to the right that somehow there is compromise to be made, there isn't. The Republican Party is no longer a legitimate political party for us to be in conversation with. And so, yes, was it a political ploy to Anne's point? Yeah, it was. But this is what we do. It is politics. And I can't stand when we continue to say that we're just like playing politics. It's the industry and it is the game. Right now, it is about securing our democracy. And you can't do that when women are not treated as equal participants in our country.
Do you think this issue and this vote in the Senate this week, Danielle, will get young women, and particularly young women of color, out voting in November?
But here's the thing, Bonnie, young women of color are the ones that always show up. We're the base of the Democratic Party. And so this isn't about galvanizing women of color, Black women, Latinx women, Indigenous women. This is about
men of color. What about men of color?
I mean, this is an issue here, but what about white women? Why are we always looking to people of color to save this country from itself? How about we talk about the 53% of white women who voted for Donald Trump and then increase that margin in the 2020 election because they want to vote alongside of their husbands? So this is not a conversation, once again, about how people of color, right, as this clump are going to save white America from itself. Because white women will be fine because they have the resources and the ability and the power to be able to get an abortion. What Black and brown women have been out in the streets for the longest time.
As someone who has covered 5 or 6 presidential campaigns in my life, the GOP does not have much of a get out the vote effort, and it doesn't need it. The Democrats do. And they're white, I'm not going to defend, female Trump supporters, but it's people of color who don't go to the polls in representative percentages the way Republicans do, who are mainly or almost exclusively white. Anyway, Tiana, your thoughts about how this will affect voters and will it energize Democrats?
So I'm just going to take it back to the stats for a moment so we can ground this conversation in a little bit of reality. That is, who broadly identifies as pro-life versus pro-choice has been stagnated. This is not an issue like gay marriage or marijuana legalization or transgender Americans in the military, where Americans, by and large, in both parties have gotten much more progressive. This is an issue that has remained primarily deadlocked, and it's because of this. Roughly 2/3 of the country is broadly supportive of first trimester abortion being legal. When you go into what they think about the morality, it's much more complicated. But they broadly believe in safe, legal, and rare. You ask about second trimester abortions, that number drops down to 3 in 10. You ask about third trimester abortions, that drops down to 13% of the entire country. And that is what the Senate put up for a vote, and it's why it was a bad vote.
Now that the Supreme Court has seemingly handed or is about to hand the states an open book, hey, pass whatever laws you want, you can ban abortion completely. You don't think that's going to energize voters? Do you or don't you?
The Collins-Murkowski bill would have actually codified Roe with the Casey framework, which would have made it so the states were then barred from putting restrictions on abortion before the point of fetal viability.
Donna, what do you think? Do you think this is going to energize Democratic voters?
These swing districts in the House that are going to be decided by 1 or 2% of the vote, an issue like this, where a decision is going to come out at the end of June, could actually be a mobilizing and galvanizing issue for women. And in those handful of Senate states that are up for grabs, I do think that women can be mobilized on this issue, and young men as well. But it's not going to hinge on whether Black and brown women show up. We're going to show up for our rights. The question is whether the decision is going to hinge on a narrow group of white women who turn those districts in those states by 1 to 2%.
Are you talking about progressive white women who just don't bother to vote, or are you talking about Trump supporters or...
No, this is a very narrow group of 1 to 2% of voters where these districts turn on that small percentage. And they are not Trump supporters. They are moderate women, primarily white suburban women in these districts. And I think that these states and districts are going to turn on that vote. That is where we need to be mobilizing.
Well, I have less concern about the House. The Senate is really where a difference could be made. There are a couple seats. Wisconsin's one, possibly even South Carolina, North Carolina, where a small shift of votes could possibly cost Republicans those seats. So I think the Senate is more problematic, and I think the goal is that that's where the judges are approved and where most of the focus is going to be. So people will be looking at the Senate as a real possibility where suburban women could vote for their congresswoman as Republican, but their senator as Democrat, as a statement on this issue. I don't think it's going to be quite as hot button as it was in 89, 90, 92, because there are too many other issues that have bubbled up. Things were relatively calm back then. The economy hadn't gone bad. So issues like abortion were much more problematic. But there is enough concern for some of the Senate races, I think.
About 8 months ago or something, when you were on this program, I asked you if young people of color were going to get out to vote. And you said, no. It was in reference to Biden having won the election. And you said, well, why should we, or something to this effect, why should we, Biden hasn't done anything for us. Has that changed?
No. Have you noticed anything that Biden has done for young people of color that came out in mass during the height of the pandemic before we had vaccinations to vote at historic levels? No, he has offered nothing. Right. And once again, here we are on this issue, which I do think is going to be important, because I don't know how you have a conversation about the economy and don't talk about women's ability to be in the workplace, like how those things are two separate siloed conversations. They are not. They are one and the same. So if you want the country to succeed, if you want us to be globally competitive, then you may want to ensure that more than half of the population has access to being inside of the workplace and has the support to do so. So, this whole back and forth that we continue to do is the reality is we are deadlocked with quote unquote moderates who function like Republicans rather than the progressive majority who believes that we need rights and protections. And I'd like for this president to act like he's actually president of the United States.
All right. From abortion rights to going back to the office. Companies such as Goldman Sachs are facing unexpected numbers of employees rejecting new in-person work mandates. The bank called all employees back to the office in March, but only about half showed up, and it remains that way. 80% of their employees worked in the office full-time before the pandemic. With more pressure on employees to return to in-person work, we are seeing Millennial and Gen Z women insisting on working from home, going hybrid, or finding new jobs that let them do so. Not so for the men, and it's no surprise. A new survey from Flex Jobs shows 60% of women versus 48% of men prefer to work remotely. This could cost Goldman Sachs its goal of reaching gender diversity in the upper echelons of the company soon. Most women don't have the luxury of working from home. Poorer women tend to hold such jobs as restaurant or factory work, domestic work, and other positions that require on-site work. So my question to you, Tiana Lowe, how can low-income women, I mean, if your job is to be checking people out of Walmart at a cashier, that's not going to be a job you can do from home. What should these women do to get the right to work from home after the pandemic is over?
Obviously, it's difficult because even though it's not as though Goldman is unionized, there's a certain level where, when you have these mandates for ESG, when you have these mandates for, we have a feminist, inclusive workplace. They know they can't just axe their female staff. And I think a lot of the reason why women in particular are attracted to the work from home model is because the pandemic showed that teachers' unions do not view the public school system as essential in the same way that hospitals and police departments view their employers as essential. And we know that schools are essential. And we know that kids going to school and mothers having childcare is essential. So for poorer women and in women in smaller workplaces, it is difficult because, for some of this, let's grant like a little bit of benevolence to these employers. They don't have the type of overhead that Goldman does to have an all digital system. Some of these jobs just require being in person. But a lot of this situation will just have to happen by necessity, especially in especially in more urban areas, more densely populated areas, where all the effects of the pandemic and the related increase in crime have really taken a toll. So a lot of it will wind up being on the city infrastructure to come back to normal, to bring back up the policing that makes these areas safe, for all of the associated businesses in downtown districts to come back. It has to be a community-wide initiative. And that's not a very pleasing answer, but some of these businesses just can't do it alone.
Well, it's a long-term answer. It's just not one that's going to solve the problem now. Danielle, your thoughts about what poor women can do or low-income women can do to try to work remotely? I mean, I suppose in reality, a cashier job could be done remotely. I'm not sure. There's got to be some genius who could figure out a way to have the cash machine be the woman's laptop at home, but it's probably decades away. So your thoughts?
I mean, I think that the reality is that there are always going to be some jobs that are not able to be remote, but it's like, what supports and systems are you putting in place as an employer to ensure that women who are also the prime caretakers for their children have the ability to do so? But I mean, being a cashier or working in retail, for instance, that is in-store, brick and mortar retail, that's not something that you're going to be able to do remotely. But it's, is your job providing childcare credits? Is the federal government going to pass, an extended childcare tax credit? Like, what are the systems that we are putting in place so that working, continuing to work as an option? You had 2.5 million women who left the workforce, between 2020 and 2022 because of the fact that they didn't have the supports in place to be able to both homeschool their children and do their at-home job, right? Because we recognize then in that, very obvious area that women do multiple jobs. Right? Like they're not just responsible for what is happening at work. They're also responsible for what is happening at home. So how are we creating systems to support women staying in the workforce is the better question.
Let me ask you this, Danielle, if we're at this strange moment in time, I can't remember anything like this during my lifetime where there are more jobs open than there are people wanting to fill them. So does this give low-income people, women and men, more ability to make demands about benefits?
Yeah, I think that workers are in a really good position right now, whether you are in a low-skill job or a high-skill job. I think that, basically the lie that we told people if you were an office worker is that you couldn't possibly do that job remotely, that you needed to be in your cubicle, that you needed to be in your office. And you've realized that industries haven't completely collapsed with remote work. So there is that issue. But then, there are more job openings because we also have to understand people want more. They want a better quality of life, right? And that is something in an odd way that for the privileged, non-essential folks were able to get during COVID. I'm able to take meetings while I'm walking and taking care of my baby and going to the grocery store and make dinner. Right? So how is your employer providing that nimbleness and flexibility, I think is the question.
And my question is, why isn't your partner sharing those duties with you?
Well,
which would make life so much easier, and maybe some daycare would be needed, but not the amount that people say is needed now. Donna.
For some workers, the flexibility that they have working remotely is really important. And it is, part of the reason that more women than men want to be in a flexible remote workplace. But the reality is that for frontline workers, for so many in the service industry, many of whom are women of color, they don't have that kind of flexibility. And I can't see an environment in which that will be true. And so then I think it does go to the question, the ideas that Danielle just put forward of how much childcare are you providing and what kind of childcare and flexibility in childcare? What about transportation to and from the office? What about wages? I think it is the reason that we are seeing a resurgence of labor organizing in the service industry, which I think is a good thing, because when workers organize, they can place more demands collectively on employers, which I think is really important in this environment. And then we haven't brought into the question of how much do we need an immigration policy that fills our workforce for all of those jobs that are in demand right now. But I think that we're going to see a complete change in the workforce. We need to make sure that that change is good for women who are college educated, but also that that change is reflected in what's good for women who are our frontline workers who are at the lowest end of our income rates.
Okay, Anne, your thoughts. I mean, we have a sort of surging economy in a way. Obviously, we have high inflation, but we have more jobs, not more jobs than there are people to fill, but more jobs than there are people who want to go to work.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that distinction, because the problem is so many people have dropped out of the workplace, and it's how do you get them back? But I echo a lot of the points that were made earlier that I think are good. Employees are in a stronger position because there's such a desperate need. You know, I can tell you how many restaurants I've been to all over this country where they have to close down early because they don't have people to come in. More and more grocery stores and retail outfits have, the scan checkouts because they don't have people to do the checkouts. So a lot of that automation is coming in. It's going to replace some of those jobs probably permanently. But that should give us an opportunity to retrain a lot of these people because, frankly, I've said this before, if women were not in this economy, we'd have to be, because the information economy actually plays best with women's skills. And it's just a matter of getting them a little bit of extra training. But we're very natural in this economy. Women were the original programmers, as we know from, Hidden Figures and all that. There's other things that we were doing all along that people didn't know about. Women can be retrained, whether they're low income or not, to take on much more challenging jobs. And we need them. Women are needed in this economy, and employers that are smart are going to put things in place to take care of childcare concerns and get the women the training to make them more productive.
Okay, Danielle, you talked about federally subsidized child care. There actually is a couple of states like California already have state programs that use unused unemployment funds to pay for child care. What's the next thing that women need after that to go back to work?
I think that there needs to be this understanding that if we want a strong country, that comes from a strong economy, and it comes from the ability of everybody to be able to participate fully in it. And we've never created the conditions and the systems for women to be able to participate fully. Right? Like, yes, we have more degrees, and yes, we have all of the schooling that is in place, but we don't actually have the support of what it means to have both a family, right? If you so choose to have a family and be able to work. So it is childcare. It is the recognition of quote unquote soft skills that are in the workplace that often fall on women to do, that men are not, that they don't have to, right? It's not associated with them. So there are ways that women are continually held back because we don't see them as essential to the productivity of the country.
Here's where I differ with you. Men have to do it. They should be doing half.
But they're not required.
A woman should not have a child with somebody, man or another woman who doesn't agree to do half the child care. That wouldn't fix everything, but it would make their lives much, much easier if there are two people splitting that work. Why isn't that?
Because we don't have a societal expectation of men to do what it is that you just said. So in heteronormative relationships, which is what we're talking about, like, you don't have those conversations because society has the expectation that women are still the caretakers, right? And that is supposed to be what they're doing. So you're not going to think about the supports and systems that need to be in place to have people be able to equally have a partnership and participate when one is expected to do these things and not complain about it.
How is this not, like, the onus is on us individually to an extent, right? To demand the bare minimum of what we expect out of a relationship. And that involves being very clear about, division of labor by parts. I don't know, maybe I'm just secretly the woke conservative one for expecting my partners to do more. But no, that's an important thing about speaking up for yourself.
No, but I mean, it's not about individuals. I think it is about changing societal norms, but in the absence of being able to do that, you have to create the normative systems within the legislative and other structures, policy structures, that make up for that, because we could be waiting until, something freezes over before the societal norms change. We should not be waiting to institute policy reforms that are going to make it possible for women to participate at the highest level that they want to in the economy.
That's it for this edition. Let's keep talking on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/to the contrary.
Be more. PBS.